Jackal Among Snakes. Author, Nemorosus. Chapter 21, Sick in Heart and Mind. Nicoletta leaned over a map of Matheth, Mina and Elias standing across from her. The map was clearly different in style than the ones that the dukedom owned, and it was not fully completed. Beside it, there were detailed reports about the knight's schedules, their composition and weaponry, and other such comprehensive military information about the dukedom of Montesai. The silence dragged out as Nicoletta read through the information. Mina paced nervously, but Elias stood firm with his arms crossed. "Why are you wearing travel clothes, Nikki?" Mina asked, breaking the silence. "My father was talking about marriage canned." She paused. "No, that's not important now. I can't deny these are genuine," she finally concluded, standing up straight. "Argrave found these?" "Yes," he said. "One of the snow elves tipped him off," Mina confirmed. She shuddered. "He found their scouting party and dispatched them. These were in their leader's shack, alongside a bunch of spellbooks that he made us haul." "A scouting party?" Nicoletta asked. Elias explained what Argrave had told them about how the druids were spying on Matheth. Nicoletta's expression slowly morphed into one of worry and confusion as the story proceeded. Finally, once Elias had finished explaining, she looked at him and asked, "Why isn't Argrave telling me this?" Elias shook his head. "He had burns, cuts, and some damage from a strange potion. He went to be healed by one of the wizards in Matheth and mentioned that he had some preparations to do." "The fight was intense." Elias lowered his head and frowned. Nicoletta crossed her arms, catching on from their expressions that they were bothered. "What exactly happened in this fight?" "He and his companion ruthlessly massacred them. There was a high-ranking wizard, B rank at least. Or high-ranking druid, whatever," Mina amended, waving her hand dismissively, "but Argrave killed them all." "Nearly 24 snow elves," Elias added grimly. "Thoroughly planned, flawlessly executed." "Maybe it was his companion that planned it, I don't know, but it was undeniably Argrave at the center of things." When it was done, he vomited and cried, but after a minute or two, he went back to usual. "Joking, laughing, like nothing happened," Mina added. Her words sounded more concerned than horrified. Nicoletta's expression hardened, and she turned away from the two. She stared at the window of the Duke's estate, eyes distant and unfocused. She had been hesitant to admit it, but Argrave reminded her of someone strongly, her brother, Elwind. Even now, as she tried to remember him, their faces seemed to overlap. It did not help that they shared the same obsidian-color hair. Both were hopelessly facetious, excessively confident, and above all, self-sacrificial. Just before he died, Elwind was cracking wise, ensuring that Nicoletta did not worry herself about his safety. Some tears came to Nicoletta's eyes, and she wiped them away and collected herself. She turned back around, clearing her throat. "I'll bring this to my father. He and I are arguing," she put simply, "but I don't think he can ignore this." "I certainly can't." "I'm sick?" Argrave said incredulously, staring at the middle-aged man before him, Bragan. His head was shaved bald, and he looked more a bodybuilder than a healing wizard, but Argrave knew he was one of the best healers in the city of Matheth. "That's what I said," Bragan confirmed. "You have a fragile constitution. You drank the blood of a wind nymph, for some ungodly reason. You were traipsing about in the forest in the middle of a cold night. And you had a fight with brigands," Bragan said, the word dripping with doubt. "Catching a cold? This shouldn't surprise you." Argrave turned away, putting his hands on his hips. He contemplated things for a second, then he turned around. "I don't think any healers in Matheth know the B-rank spell, cure disease, right?" Bragan put one of his giant hands to his chin, thinking. "No. None I know, at least. And besides, it's quite expensive for such a minor affliction." Bragan reached to the counter and grabbed the bag of gold coins. "I recommend simply resting for a few days, especially after experiencing such an intense shock." "There is no rest for the wicked," Argrave dismissed, contemplating. Bragan shook his head and walked away, gesturing his hands towards the door. Argrave complied. Galamon was waiting for him outside. Galamon took a drink from his flask as Argrave approached. "You're sick?" Argrave frowned. "Stupid vampire supersenses. Whatever happened to doctor-patient confidentiality? You mentioned having more to do. Sounds like you don't intend on cancelling those plans." Galamon stashed his flask away. "Indeed. It's only a cold, a minor affliction. Besides, ever since I saw Tyros cast that spell, I've been itching to dip my hands back into trying to get past C-rank magic. Honestly, paying to have the disease cured is a waste of money. I'll just suffer in silence." "You seem to like that." Galamon pulled his helmet tighter. "What does that mean?" Argrave probed. "I thought you were like Gary Cooper, the strong, silent type." "What's with that comment?" "I don't know who Gary Cooper is." Galamon looked around as people walked past him. "Let's walk," said Argrave, catching that Galamon felt this place was too public. Argrave led the two of them through Matheth, until they eventually walked out on one of the empty segments of the dock. The seagulls flew about. Argrave was paranoid about being the target of an air bombing from the filthy birds, and that reminded him he needed to learn warding magic. "That was the first time you've killed someone," Galamon said plainly, devastating instead of asking. Argrave turned to look at him. "You're worried about me? From what you've disclosed, we're going to be in combat often. You need to be stable." Galamon turned, taking off his helmet and placing it beneath the crook of his arm. His white hair flowed in the wind. "I've fought in wars. I was a general once. I've trained men to kill. It's an unpleasant trade, but it is mine." "You said I did well," Argrave countered, not wishing to talk about the subject. "You did. I think you have a certain talent for strategy, and you have the composure necessary to execute plans. Your uncanny knowledge makes both easier." Galamon raised his gauntleted hands up. "I won't pry for details. I've talked more today than I do most weeks, so I'll try and wrap it up now." Argrave shifted on his feet, waiting for Galamon to continue. "That scene was rough. It should bother you." "It bothers me." Galamon touched his chest plate. "Could have fooled me," Argrave rebuked suspiciously. A bell rang out across the docks, marking the arrival of a new ship. "You walk forward like you have a duty, a task, and you try to bury your fears, your worries. I am no better. I have done the same my entire life. The fact that it bothers you, that battle. Let it not serve as a reminder of the carnage you're about to face, but the peace you seek to bring." Argrave frowned. "Vay tells you it's your duty to conquer the other races, and you're talking to me about peace?" Galamon raised a brow. "Vade wishes for us to conquer all to bring peace to the world. I fight at your side because of our contract, but I believe Vaiden will win this war. Such is the way of our faith." Argrave stepped away towards the ocean and looked out across the waves. "The war will end with a peace treaty if I have my way." "The Vaiden do not compromise," Galamon said, stepping beside Argrave. "Diplomacy will not suffice. Vaiden will win, or it will die. That is our way." "Even in the face of Gerektig Kiet?" Argrave asked with a grim smile. "Your people know him by a different name, of course. He who would judge the gods. It's too damned long, though, so I prefer Gerektig Kiet." Galamon's head spun to Argrave's face, staring him down intently. Argrave watched the coming and going of the ocean as the bell of the docks continued to ring. In the far distance, a trading ship came ever closer to the docks. The seagulls moved towards it, inspecting it for fresh food. In the far distance, Argrave spotted a four-eyed shark peering at their ship as it passed. "Then Earl of Nir wishes for you to..." Galamon began to question, but then he crouched to the docks and stared out across the ocean. Time passed as both of them seemed to idly appreciate the breeze. Eventually, Galamon stood. He looked at his helmet. "No wonder you move so frantically. You're fighting against the end of all." "Indeed. This kingdom is about to fall apart at the seams. The Vaidaimen are going to invade, a plague is coming, myriad monsters are going to appear, and all this occurs just before an ancient calamity is about to be reborn. So much on my to-do list." Argrave shrugged. "Huh?" Galamon sighed. He pulled his hair back and put his helmet back on, taking another long drink from his flask. "It seems Vade has planned a long atonement for me." "You intend to stand in defense against he who would judge the gods?" "I know. Some court case. Apparently, even without a juris doctor, I'm the best defense attorney in the world, pro se litigant of the century. If the judge won't listen, well, such is life, or death, as it were." Galamon took a deep breath and exhaled. "I've come to realize I should ignore half of what you say." Argrave chuckled, and then shuddered. His body felt drained and weak, reminding him that he truly was sick. "I wonder if the invasion will happen before that auction." "I hope not." "Well, for now, I suppose I should just read." "That counts as resting." No, well, whatever," Argrave dismissed. He walked away from the docks. Each step he took forward felt a little easier than it had been before. Perhaps it had been Galamon's advice, or perhaps, more simply, sharing a small portion of his burden with another had made his journey onwards easier. Indune held the Margrave Reinhardt's white knife in his hand, waving it about in the moonlight. It shimmered as though coated by something, a thin film of magic, undoubtedly. He was still lost in thought about the fight. Reinhardt had been much more decisive, proactive, and predictive. He had a better sense for what was going to occur. Indune questioned if that was experience, or simply skill. Outside, Indune heard heavy footsteps. Believing he recognized them, he set down the knife and sat up straighter. The footfalls grew louder, and then the door burst open. King Felipe III strode in, Indune's father, patriarch of House Vasca, and sovereign of the Kingdom of Vasca. House Vasca's current members were all quite tall, and the genesis of that was their father. He had been a giant of a man in his youth, broad-shouldered, barrel-chested. Even old, he was still quite formidable. He had a great mane of unruly, barely graying obsidian black hair, and a beard that stretched well to his stomach. His eyes were the same grey Argrave's were. He wore the colors of House Vasca, black and gold, but it was highlighted by a rich imperial purple. A black kingly mantle hung from his shoulders with the symbol of House Vasca sewn on its back in gold. "Hello, father," Indune greeted calmly. Felipe strode closer until he was standing face to face with Indune. "Have you learned nothing from what I taught you?" The two spoke calmly, but there was no familial affection in their dialogue. "We wanted a revolt from House Parban. We got it." Felipe raised his hand and grabbed Indune's throat. He picked him up with one hand as though he was a child, and then slammed him against the table head first. "We?" the king shouted. Do you wish to die? Because that's the only reason I could even begin to consider how you could act so naively. The king released Indune and came to his feet. He spoke calmly again, as though he had not seconds ago been roaring in anger. When people talk about this war and how it began, they won't speak of Parban instigating it. Instead, they'll talk about how the crown prince's guards began massacring the people when they tried to stop the evil royal knights from making a fool out of the Margrave. Indune began to sit up, but the king kicked him in the teeth. The prince slid back through the wreck of wood. You don't think, Felipe continued. You disrespect the throne. You are my son and heir, but you are only that. I am not dead, nor near death. I am the king, and you should not disobey me again. Felipe kneeled down, grabbing Indune's shirt and pulling him to his face. Are we clear? Yes, Indune enunciated clearly despite the blood trickling down his face. Felipe released his grip, and Indune dropped back to the floor. The king directed someone to heal Indune, and then wiped off his blood-soaked hand on his mantle. Considering you used that illegitimate child to worsen the relationship between House Parban and Montesai, I reduced the punishment to a mere beating, Felipe commented. I've contacted Iran. He'll be returning. This should be suppressed quickly. I will teach you both how to war. Keep your ears open, you may learn something. Be thankful. Thank you, father, Indune said, his blue eyes veritably burning a hole in the back of his father's departing figure. Chapter 22, Sick Tension. So, which cup has the coin? Mina asked, running her hand over an array of 3 identical cups. Elias sat in a chair at a rickety yet clean table, while Mina sat atop it. Argrave was buried beneath blankets in a bed at the corner of the room, forming a shivering hump as he peered at a book dimly lit by sunlight through a boarded window. Some days had passed. Mateth had been a hive of activity as the troops were rallied. Galamon sat at the foot of the bed, watching fumes rise into the air from a brewing potion. It was a potion that calmed the mind. Argrave considered it the reason he had been able to do what he had in the battle and had elected to make more before the invaders arrived. Its ingredients were the last of Argrave's funds, barring that set aside for necessary expenses like food. This one, said Elias, pointing at the center cup. Mina lifted it. It was blank. Elias lifted the other 2 with both of his free hands, but none of them had the coin. What? Check behind your ear, said Mina gleefully. Elias retrieved the coin and widened his eyes. Argrave frowned, his annoyed face peeking out from the blankets. You're supposed to be helping me with C-rank magic, Mina. Mina hopped off the table, striding to his bedside. I told you what I know, Grave. 4th dimension magic, for me, was like looking past a veil, or finding out the secret to a magic trick. Looks complicated, but it's simple deep down. Elias stood, setting the coin back on the table politely. It's useless to ask for help. It's different for everybody. Why are you 2 at my house, anyway? Said Argrave, burrowing deeper into his blankets. Your house, Grave? You said it was abandoned, Mina countered. My father won't miss me, he barely knows I exist. Mom might make a fuss, eventually, but that's beside the point. And Elias here decided to stay and help. Mina gestured at Elias, who still refused to meet Argrave's eyes. Whatever. Do silent magic tricks. Argrave shivered. And stay off the table. You may be like a cat, but you aren't a real one. People eat namely, me. Mina scoffed, yet still sat at the chair. You don't look like you do much eating. Someone knocked at the door. Galamon's head whipped cleanly, and he stood, drawing his dagger and holding it close at attention. He opened the door slowly, peeking through. Then, he opened it wide and walked away. Hey, Nikki. Mina greeted. Nicoletta entered. She wore custom-fitted leather armor, the blue swordfish of Montesai painted on the breastplate. As testament to the wealth of the dukedom, it was thoroughly inscribed, and enchantments shone along those inscriptions brilliantly. It was a familiar set of armor. In the normal course of heroes of Berenda, after Nicoletta was expelled from the Order of the Grey Owls, she would be involved in the civil war briefly before returning to Mateth after hearing it was invaded by the Snow Elves. The armor set she wore was an heirloom and was found in the Duke's estate, which had been overrun by Vadaimon. Hey Mina. She looked around the room, giving a nod to Elias. Galamon sat back down in front of Argrave's bed, staring at the brewing potion like a dejected puppy. Nicoletta spotted Argrave and walked up slowly. Argrave, you look terrible, she said in concern. Don't lie to me. My superior good looks are my one benefit in this binpole body. Argrave put his hand to his face to accentuate his handsomeness. His hand was warm, but his face still felt too cold. Nicoletta elected to ignore his comment. Every time I see you, you look more and more unhealthy. Enough about me. Argrave closed his book. The Beretta troop auction. You said it hadn't happened yet. When is it? Tonight, Nicoletta answered. And, considering that you may have saved the entirety of the dukedom of Montesai should this invasion truly occur, it is a matter of honor that I help you get entry. I don't want to participate. Are you kidding? A bunch of people in a tightly packed place, all yelling and spitting like starving dogs, fighting over scraps in some vainglorious perversion of both gambling and mercantilism. Argrave paused, taking a deep breath after his rant. I merely have something to sell. If you really want to help, spread rumors about the exhibit so that it attracts more vultures. I'd need to know what you are selling. Argrave paused, and then threw the blanket off. He strode across the room and pulled aside a decrepit plank, then pulled out a piece of paper. He walked back to Nicoletta and handed it to her, and then crawled back in the blankets. "Ugh, these blankets are all sweaty. I need new ones," Argrave complained as Nicoletta read through the document. He stood, bunching them together while shivering intensely. Galamon stood, taking the sheets from Argrave by force. He pointed to the bed, clearly commanding Argrave to lay back down. "This is the deed for Foamspire?" Nicoletta spoke incredulously. Galamon walked away, off to fetch clean blankets. How observant, Argrave said between shivers, veritably falling in bed. "Indune gave it to me after giving some. Tough love, I suppose." Though, perhaps he'd hate me calling it love. He seems to resent that word. "Why would you sell this?" Nicoletta said, treating the paper carefully. "It's an extremely valuable piece of land. Many nobles rent out apartments during the summer and vacation there. Its income rivals a small city, and, well, Indune gave it to you after what happened last time. He's too busy dealing with his awful dad and the soon-to-be civil war. An estate is stable income, true, but I don't need a stable income. I need loads of lucre now," Argrave said quickly. Galamon walked back in with fresh blankets, and Argrave quickly snatched them from his hands and covered himself. "Why?" Nicoletta inquired. "For gambling, of course," Argrave said cheerily, then started shifting to cover all of himself with the blankets. He became a woolen caterpillar in seconds. "Kidding, naturally. Blackjack doesn't exist yet. Gambling is fruitless. I'm sure my father would be willing to buy Foamspire for a fair price." Argrave opened his mouth, about to disclose that Foamspire would collapse into the ocean in a few months. Then, he remembered that Nicoletta was one of the good player characters, and she probably wouldn't be overfond of blatantly scamming people. "Then your father can go to the auction and bid," Argrave said instead. "You still haven't said why you need this money." Nicoletta pushed further. She grabbed a chair from the table and pulled it beside the bed. Argrave frowned. "Money is a precious thing in a country at war. The Vadiman invasion, the impending civil war. Every time we talk, you sound so certain there will be a civil war," Nicoletta noted, leaning forward and placing her hands on her knees. "It's probably already started. No matter what, it'll happen. The how, the when, the where, it's all just backdrop to the inevitability. Most of the common folk hate the royal family on account of increased taxes and rising serfdom. Beyond that, this was, from the very beginning, a scheme by Vasca. I know because they sought to involve me in it. The royal family wants war. Felipe wants to purge disloyal subjects and replace them with sycophants. It's in anticipation for the succession." Argrave scratched his chin and then added as an afterthought, "Also, he wants to give Orion some land." Though Heroes of Berenda was a very dynamic game, there were some things the player could not change. The civil war would always happen. Some of the 9 playable characters could delay it slightly, but it still happened eventually. However, how the war resolved depended on the player's actions. The abandoned house had grown very quiet, and everyone had turned to look at Argrave. Argrave, caught in the moment, continued from beneath his pile of blankets. "Parban was the main target, but they have many friends and I'm sure much of the south, Montesi included, will join in favor of those against Vasca. The north will remain firmly under heel of Vasca, though most of the northern nobles move pragmatically rather than righteously. Supporting the royal family gets them the biggest benefit." Nicoletta lowered her head and black strands of hair covered her face. Elias stood and walked towards the window. Mina was looking at how everyone else reacted. "So you'd made up your mind to turn your back on the royal family in the tower," Nicoletta said as if in epiphany. "Back then, when my research had been stolen, Indune genuinely had done it. It was one part of the provocations. He was acting independently of King Felipe. But yes, it was duly to provoke Montesi and eliminate threats to his succession. If this is true, it only reinforces the validity of the rebellion. A king pledges protection in exchange for service. Such callous disregard of life is not befitting of a true king." Nicoletta picked her head up and stared at Argrave. Argrave kept his own thoughts about the validity of the rebellion hidden. House Vasca was undoubtedly cruel and evil, but House Parban lacked a plan beyond simply overthrowing the king. If the player sided with the rebels, the kingdom would fall into crisis as people scrambled to present their own vague claim to the throne. Righteous causes were always undermined by selfishness. Of course, if one sided with Vasca, things did not sail smoothly either. King Felipe would die, and Indune and Orion would fight over the throne. Many nobles would simply declare independence, breaking off from the kingdom. The entire situation was a mess regardless of who was chosen. "Well, as long as you sell that little piece of paper, I'll be happy. I'm easy to please." Nicoletta nodded as if drawn out of a haze. "Then, I'll be sure to do that." She stood. "On one condition. You have to rest." Argrave squinted incredulously but smiled. "Such a monumental task? What shall I do? I suppose I have no choice. And I do mean rest. No reading, no errands, nothing." "Mina tells me you barely sleep, eat only plain food, and spend all hours of the day either trying to learn C-rank magic or memorizing those druidic spells you looted." "Yeah. And then I wander to a pipal tree, sit in a lotus position, and try to reach nirvana." Argrave shook his head. Please. I'm fine. I read until I fall asleep. I eat plain food because it's all I can stomach with this damned sickness. Nicoletta fixed her hair and shook her head. She stared at Argrave with her deep pink eyes for a time, and Argrave stared back. She broke her gaze away and sighed. There was another thing. Considering it's you that brought this whole thing to my attention, I wanted your thoughts on the invasion. Argrave paused. He scooched around awkwardly in his cocoon of blankets till he sat upright. It's bad timing. Luckily, I was able to reveal it. No, I mean, strategy-wise. Mina told me you intended to stay and help out, but I wanted to know what you were going to do. Further, what you think the snow elves are going to do. She stared at him intently. I'm going to one of the coastal villages. Why the villages? Nicoletta sat back down. Argrave looked down for a second, running through his thought process. The Vadaimon resemble Vikings, but they're not berserkers. They're strategic. Argrave started to explain, but Nicoletta stared at him with brows furrowed. You don't know what those words mean. I forget. Argrave pulled his hand free from the blanket and set it on his knee. The Vadaimon will come in longships. They're long, thin boats, driven by oar. They'll land at the coastal villages first, instead of striking at Matoth directly from sea. This will enable them to gain a foothold on land and secure a safe harbor. Then, once that's done, they'll probably mass troops for a day or two before marching on Matoth. Nicoletta considered this. So, we should focus our ships near the coastal villages, catch them there? Argrave shook his head. The Vadaimon know druidic magics, you forget. They'll scout ahead with birds before any rash attack. If you concentrate your ships anywhere, they'll go elsewhere, Argrave said, quietly refuting the point. Anyway, once they march on Matoth, they'll probably bring ships to attack the city's docks concurrently. I suspect they'll concentrate their mages on those ships. Like this, the city is surrounded, and your magic users are tied up dealing with those at sea. The infantry can advance unmolested. The walls will probably make it tough for them, though. Nicoletta stared at Argrave. Everyone was staring. He realized he had gotten absorbed in talking. The Vadaimon have more troops than you do. These men are battle-hardened warriors, too, not trained knights that have been wallowing in peace. They're ignorant of some things like illusion magic and enchantment, but by and large their magic knowledge is no less formidable than what we have in Veska. They may have a few A-rank mages, but I can't say that with any certainty. The only advantage we have is the position of defense. Did you strategize for the attack on the scouts' camp? Nicoletta asked. Yes. Why? Do you have ideas for the defense? Sure, but, Nicoletta stood. I think you should talk to my father. You can stay in a better place than some abandoned house you broke into. Hey, I found a key. No breaking in involved. Argrave protested, then broke off into a coughing fit. Why should I see your father, though? Nicoletta adjusted her armor and walked to the door. To convey what you told me, and to help prepare a good defense. You know the situation well. I don't know how or why you know, but your knowledge has been accurate so far. Argrave pondered this. He had intended to meet Duke and Rico at some point, but he assumed it would be after the battle had been won. If the battle had been won, rather. Argrave threw off the blankets. I have no reason to refuse. He pointed at Mina and Elias. These two squatters can help carry my things. They've had practice at it. Chapter 23, Insomnia. Must you go personally, Master Castro? A grey-robed figure followed behind a short old man. Though the figure was mostly shrouded by the robe's cowl, locks of light blue hair barely peeked out. The old man smiled and turned. His face was sagging, but he looked genial and charitable. The very picture of a sweet old man. The robe he wore was grey, but it glowed with enchantments, and a grand image of an owl shone like a diamond on the shoulders. Yes, I must. I have to handle a great deal of business elsewhere before heading to Matoth, but I must meet our young acolyte personally to earn his favor. Genius is uncommon, but most often, it births two things, pride and eccentricity. That small little dissertation, if moved from theory to practice, could well shake the entire magical world. Castro's voice sounded tired but gentle. Do you think? The other paused. I think I'd like a fellow. Never mind. A fellow disciple? Castro smiled. Perhaps, Ingo. This trip serves two purposes, to show the boy that his talents are valued by the Order, and to suss out his character. If I must lower my face as Master of the Order of the Grey Owl to help Rising Star lift the Order further up, so be it. But he's part of the Royal. Ingo trailed off. Castro stepped forward and grabbed Ingo's shoulder. He had to reach up to do so. The boy stared at the old Tower Master with innocent brown eyes. I know you have much reason to fear the Veskas, but rest assured, I will not allow anyone to hurt you ever again. Your life has been a cruel one, but I am resolved to make sure that cruelty ends. Be at ease, Ingo. Castro squeezed his shoulder tightly, and then released his grip. Ingo rubbed his hands together, smiling. He looked fully grown, but some of his mannerisms still had a childlike innocence. I am more worried for you, Master Castro. Castro laughed and turned away. You are far too young to be worrying for me. I do not go looking for danger, and even still, few things on this continent can truly endanger me. The Tower Master walked to the edge of the large stone room they were in, opening the door to a balcony. The balcony extended off for a time, and it peculiarly lacked a railing. Ingo hung near the door, and his hood blew off from the intense wind. His light blue hair whipped about wildly. Undaunted by the fierce winds, Castro walked to the edge of the balcony and fished into his pockets as casually as one would look for their car keys. He pulled free a black whistle studded with rubies and other such precious gemstones. He blew it, and a piercing shrill chirp echoed from the top of the tower. Castro looked towards some distant mountains, waiting. Soon enough, a black dot appeared in the distance, gradually growing closer. As it grew closer, it slowly came into a view. A grey wyvern sped towards the tower ferociously. The tower master walked off the balcony. Ingo clenched the door frame tighter, but his eyes widened in surprise when the old man simply floated in the air. Castro started to walk downwards as though there was a set of stairs in the air. Ingo knew it was simply one of his master's myriad spells. The wyvern passed beneath Castro, and then the two ascended into the sky. Ingo watched him go in wonder. Then, he quietly turned and shut the door to the balcony, standing alone in the grand chambers of the Master of the Order of the Grey Owl. Argrave sat up quickly, drenched in sweat from a nightmare involving fire. He took a few seconds to gather his bearings. He was confused by his surroundings for a moment, but then he came to remember he was in the Duke's residence, on a guest bedroom with a seaside balcony. He waited for his beating heart to calm down, and then he stood. He felt much better than he had earlier today. Perhaps he had sweated out the sickness. Galamon was absent, refilling his flasks. Argrave had come to learn the snow elf vampire kept many flasks of blood on his person, usually enough for a whole week. The Duke and Rico had said he would speak to Argrave in the morning. Even if Nicoletta had some faith in Argrave's ability, he himself assumed the Duke would not especially trust the strategy advice of some young royal bastard. The Duke had seen war before. Argrave was likely still a child in his eyes. Argrave changed from his night clothes to something more suited for formal occasions. It came from his luggage that he left with Nicoletta when Reinhardt had abducted him. He took a look in the mirror in the room. Tailored clothes hit his tall, skinny frame better, and Argrave personally enjoyed dressing well. Fine clothes, fine jewelry, they were fun to own and wear. He spotted the bronze hand mirror on his nightstand, and what little distraction he had found quickly drained away. As always, the thing served as a stark reminder of his duty, his role as the one to struggle against Kirektik Kiet. He walked and picked it up, tossing it in the air and catching it by the handle. Within, he read his status once again. Traits: tall, sickly, weak, intelligent, magic of inity, high, insomniac, blessing of supersession, max. Skills: elemental magic, D. Blood magic, D. Healing magic, D. Illusion magic, D. Warding magic, D. Druidic magic, F. Inscription, E. Imbuing, E. It was somewhat validating to see the results of his constant study. Warding magic was already at D, and although Argrave had learned only a few spells, Druidic magic was heading upwards. He thought the traits section had remained the same, but he spotted a new entry. Argrave couldn't help but laugh. Insomniac, To think I used to be proud of always getting my 8 hours. Now that he thought of it, since he had become Argrave, he had never once fallen asleep easily and woke up undisturbed. Even before the battle at the scouts' camp, he was troubled by sleeplessness and nightmares. He would dream that everything was normal. Perhaps he was back in the lecture room at college, or driving, or enjoying a quiet family dinner. Then, it would all vanish. He would trip, or blink, and he was back in Berenda, with fell monsters and wars. A place familiar, yet wholly unfamiliar. Saving the world was fun to read about, to hear about. But to have that burden hoisted on you? Novel usp.com. Forget it. I don't have the right to complain. Argrave tossed the hand mirror on the bed and stood, heading for the pile of stacked books in the corner of the guest room. He filtered through druidic spells, setting aside the ones that were useless. Generally, druidic spells were best for scouting. One could also aid life in growing, but Argrave had little need for that type of magic. He paused, spotting the book on C-rank elemental magic out of the corner of his eye. He reached down and picked it up, walking towards the balcony. He pulled aside the curtains and walked out. The ocean crashed against the shore. One could see the grass plains and field of crops outside Mateth just barely. In the distance, ships traveled, magic flames swirling about them to light the path. Above it all, the red full moon stood, just beginning to wane. Argrave opened the C-rank elemental magic book, leaning out across the balcony. He willed some of his magic into the book. Past D-rank, spell books had to be enchanted with spells to project a matrix. Once his magic stirred within him and exited from his fingers, the C-rank spell matrix of Wargfire hovered in the air just above the book. Argrave could see it, but he could not comprehend it. It reminded him of a time where he had been looking at a giant mountain from a helicopter. The mountain had been so large, it was difficult for his mind to comprehend its scale. Argrave shut the book with an audible pop, sighing in quiet defeat. Argrave held his hand out above the ocean, staring at his palm. He most often wore gloves for fear of getting dirty, so he rarely saw his hands and fingers. He conjured only the matrix of his favorite D-rank spell, Writhing Lightning. Briefly, He recalled those snow elves that had been left spasming from electricity, writhing despite having been long dead. The image left him quickly, disturbing his calm heart. The spell matrix hovered in the air. It was a bizarre amalgamation of many 3D shapes, but each had a purpose and a function, and they came together to execute a spell. It was a little like a ridiculously complex programming language, Argrave reckoned. The thought made him laugh, but he maintained the matrix. As long as he put no magic power into it, the spell would not activate. Besides, he had no magic power. He had been siphoning most of it to repay Erlebna for the magic loan. From F to E, the only change was adding another dimension to magic. It took it from one line to multiple lines, branching off in different directions, forming shapes. They took shape, forming simple ideas and executing simple actions. From E to D, another dimension entered the scenario. The flat shapes were given depth. Simple shapes could form complex models. The third dimension was the basis of all humans could perceive, the extent of their perception of reality. But, if one were to boil it down, all that was added was another line and a new direction to move. Another plane. He clenched his hand, and the spell matrix dissipated into nothing. If he were to imagine the fourth dimension, another line, another path, another direction, another layer of complexity to the mystical force that it was magic. Argrave held his hand forward, eyes closed. He pictured that matrix that he had just seen in the book, a fourth dimension, a step away from the mundane, a step further from the grounded reality of his former life, and one into the abyss that was Berenda. He opened his eyes again and willed his magic to his hands. The matrix of warp fire materialized, and a great maw of flame roared from Argrave's hand. It surged forward like a living beast, dancing into the night. Its fiery teeth came together and let out an echoing clack, like two solid fangs had genuinely met. Even from behind it, Argrave could feel the power. Then, it vanished into the night as though it never was. Mute from shock, Argrave stared out across the ocean. His wide eyes slowly closed, and a smile spread across his face. He briefly worried that someone would come and see what exactly he was doing up here, but no one came. The night remained as silent as ever. I guess that wasn't so bad after all, Argrave smiled, kicking off the railing and standing straight. He stretched and walked back inside. He walked over to the bronze hand mirror and picked it up, about to look at his new acquisition. Then, he came to a stop. He weighed the mirror in his hand, and then tossed it on the ground. He fell onto his bed in a disorderly heap. So many options just opened up for me, Argrave muttered into the bed. It's like I'm a kid who's just walked into an ice cream shop, and I see hundreds of flavors arrayed out before me. With C-rank magic and the blessing of supersession, Argrave could become a force in his own right. Of course, he'd need to learn and memorize some certain spells. Naturally, as the ranks get higher, acquiring those rare spells becomes considerably more difficult for the average spellcaster. At least, Argrave knew exactly where to go once the shackles of this invasion were broken. For the first time in a long while, sleep came easily to Argrave. He did not even notice that his sheets were still sweaty. Chapter 24, Changing Wind and Rain. Argrave awoke with a song inexplicably stuck in his head. Midday sunlight poked at his eyelids, forcing him to turn. The action woke him further and he sat up. He conjured simple water magic, cleaned his hands diligently, and then rubbed his eyes. The cold wetness brought him from the dream world. He blinked his eyes a few times, and then slid off the bed. Ooh, there ain't nothing you can do. I got my eye on you. Argrave sang the chorus quietly, humming the words he forgot to the rest of the song. He went to his luggage and retrieved a pair of gloves, slipping them on. His sickness felt mostly gone. He still felt a bit weak, but then he always felt weak. Argrave channeled half of his magic into blessing of supersession. The magic debt he'd accrued in the fight at the druids' camp would probably not be alleviated before the invasion occurred. It made him uneasy. That said, one's magic pool was like a muscle. In order to train it, it needed to be exhausted. The more he drained his magic, the more he would be able to hold. It was the closest thing to training Argrave could perform. One push-up would probably break his wrists. Argrave cleaned his teeth with a cloth and some water, and after washed his hair in the wash basin. He combed his hair back neatly. It was getting long. It fell a little past his ears. Argrave's chin was still smooth, though. He was too young to be growing even peach fuzz, it seemed. Argrave frowned. Come to think of it, I'm not sure how old I really am. I certainly look fully grown, judging by height alone. The thought passed, and Argrave reprimanded himself for worrying so much about his appearance. Should probably go meet Nicoletta, talk to her father as she wanted. He straightened his clothes and made for the door, still singing. Some girl, old flame, jumped the stage cursing her name. Tells her just where she ought to go. Argrave pulled the double doors back. A maid standing in front jumped back. She clearly had her ear to the door. Forgive me, Lord. I was just instructed. You're forgiven. I know, I'm a saint. Anyway. Argrave waited for her to speak. The Duke is looking for you, sir. The maid curtsied quickly. I hadn't intended to. I was merely checking if the Lord was awake. Argrave put his hand to his chest. And instead, you were enraptured by my soothing serenade. I understand completely. Argrave smiled genially, and the maid's tense shoulders dropped. Well, where is the Duke? Then, I have never actually spoken to him before. This will be a new experience. He is in his study with the young lady Montesi. I can guide you there, if you wish. She began to ask. Argrave held his hand out to stop her. I know where his study is. I am sure you must be busy with other things. Do not let me keep you. Have a pleasant day. He bowed and then walked past her in long strides, humming the tune now that he was no longer in private. The extent of what Argrave knew about Duke Enrico is what was written. Without fail, he died in the beginning of the game to the Snow Elves. The player could find his corpse, and some of his stats existed in the game files, but his personality was mostly unknown to the player beyond what Nicoletta said about him while playing as her. The bulk of it could be summarized as pragmatic. He was also a widower. His wife died giving birth to Nicoletta. Had no idea you were such a flirt. Argrave jumped at the voice, turning around to where it came from. Mina materialized, starting with her short yellow hair. Another illusion spell. Ha! We're 1-2 now, Mina taunted, pointing at him. Argrave was confused for a second, but he remembered that he'd found Mina twice while she was hiding invisible. After Argrave straightened his cuffs and regained his composure, a rhyme came to his head. Who keeps score? You're such a bore. Mina ignored him, her eyes veritably glinting. Should have heard yourself. My soothing serenade, all smiles and bows. You think that's flirting? Argrave asked incredulously. What else would it be? General propriety, Argrave countered, walking down the hall again. Gregariousness. Sure, Mina agreed sarcastically. You're real polite. You never make fun of people to their face. I hear the dripping jealousy. Argrave, how dare you use honeyed words to a woman besides me? Argrave mocked. Why, you're ridiculous. I had no idea you were this shameless, Mina refuted, sputtering. Well, if you're in these high spirits, I can assume you're feeling better? Changing the subject, I see, Argrave answered without committing. I don't like. Mina trailed off. Never mind. Pointless to argue with someone like you. I know you don't like me. Not romantically, at least. Argrave said. Mina nodded in satisfaction now that he confirmed it. Instead, you much prefer Nicoletta, don't you? Argrave brought up a fact he knew from the game, seeking petty revenge for being frightened. Mina went white as a sheet, and she anxiously said, that's not. What are you? Nickies. No need to get flustered, Argrave assured, enjoying this very much. Romance is a natural part of life. Though, one wonders why you've left your affections unvoiced. You have no idea what you're talking about, Mina answered, regaining her composure quickly. She was good at acting, as ever. Sure, Argrave nodded. Keep quiet, subdued, when an invasion is coming at any time. Leave that burning question unanswered. Very prudent. Brave. Nicky's also a woman, Mina bit back, his jabs inciting a reaction precisely because they were the truth. That's no reason. The heart wants what the heart wants. Argrave stopped in the hall and turned to Mina now that their conversation interested him. Believe me, I know. Then you. Mina looked at him with wide eyes. Me? No. But my best friend since childhood swings that way. He ended up fairly happy in life. Argrave smiled as he recalled things. Mina seemed hesitant to speak further, but she eventually asked, what happened to him? Henry? Argrave trailed off as his mind went back to the life he left behind. He died. An accident. The lie came smoothly. In truth, it was Argrave who had died and come to this hellish place. But Argrave tried to dispel his errant thoughts, shaking his head. He and his partner were happy. They died together, at least. Oh. I'm sorry, Mina quickly said. As am I, Argrave agreed. Anyway, I should be off. The young lady Montesi and the old gentleman Montesi await me. It's sure to be a blast. Argrave turned to leave, then stopped himself. He pointed at Mina. I want you to think of what I said. Remember this. The worst that can happen is that she says number. She probably won't, though. I know these things. Trust me. Have I ever been wrong before? Think long and hard. You keep. Mina started, but she deflated quickly. Argrave turned and waved as he walked away. The winds of the north roared fiercely as they traveled across the icy landscape. The fierce tempest carried snow enough to conceal distant mountains and vast forests. A great wall stood tall against it all. It was made of ice that had been carved out by hand. The wall was near 100 feet tall, and no snow passed above it, instead blanketing the icy peak just above that shielded the city like an umbrella. The city beyond lay untouched. The buildings were simple and long, made of stone and held by pillars of the same material. Carvings stretched across most of the city, making it appear more like a ruin than an inhabited place. The people walking about were tall and formidable. Their skin was as pale as the snow outside the city's walls and their ears came to sharp points. They wore dense fur clothes, and many walked about with a bow or an axe. Opposite the ice wall was a sheer grey wall carved from stone. A great structure jutted out of the front of it, overlooking the city. It was a formidable keep. Grey smoke rising from the black fires atop the towers. The tusked skull of a gigantic creature hung from the keep, its empty sockets forever staring menacingly at the wall of ice. At the foot of the stone wall, a large passageway led to a spiral staircase winding up into the keep. The keep was filled with Vadaimon. Barring the lightly armored spellcasters, the bulk of them were warriors. Their armor was plate, but it was all covered in dense fur to ward from the penetrating cold. In the heart of the keep, the throne room, a great assemblage of fierce-looking snow elves had gathered, each sitting at one long rectangular table that stretched to the end of the room. Each of the people sitting had a few behind them, stance polite as though waiting to serve. They seemed to be men and women in equal numbers. At the throne, a short yet fiercely scarred man sat casually. His head was cleanly shaven, but a crown of iron, fangs, and claws all arrayed with points upwards decorated his forehead. He kept his eyes fixed at the foot of the stairs. There, a badly burnt scarred Vadaimon was supported by a few snow elves. Though the burns had been treated, most of his body was badly affected. His pale white skin served as a harsh contrast to the red and black scars. It was Galamon the Great? The man on the throne asked. You're certain? Yes, Patriarch. The burned elf answered hoarsely. Patriarch Draz shifted on his throne, obviously discomfited by the news. How could you tell when the attack was so sudden and swift? The burned elf swallowed, and then took a deep, wheezing breath. We had confirmed Galamon's presence. The elf paused for another wheezing breath. In Mateth many months ago, my patriarch. I had seen him at times, while using the pigeons to scout. The appearance was identical. The patriarch leaned back in his throne. All of the snow elves arrayed kept quiet, waiting for their leader to inquire further. If he opposes the invasion, Galamon would know more about our military than anyone save me. Since he's behind the attack, it's safe to assume that most of our military secrets will be leaked. That's assuming the humans will even accept his aid. They are wary of us, Vadaimon. Even possessing the scouts' reports, he will not be able to reach anyone. One of the people at the table spoke. He was with a man, another commented. If he's enlisted aid in this battle of his, he can likely use them. But Galamon, even after being exiled, still follows the teachings of Vade, Patriarch Draz said, voice low and frustrated. He may as well be my brother. He firmly believes in Vaiden, even if Vade has stricken him with the curse of bloodthirst. Something is off. Maybe he is not the leader in this scenario, a woman's voice said. She was quickly interrupted. Be quiet, Annalise. Everyone's heads turned to two near the end of the table. An aged elven woman sat at the table, wearing mage's robes. Another woman stood behind her, tall and skinny, with silken white hair descending down to her knees. Her amber eyes stared ahead, unshaken. My apologies, the old mage sitting said. I brought her here to learn. She forgot her place, Patriarch Draz. The patriarch scratched his chin. We are all children of Vade. Let her speak, he dismissed, waving his hand. Annalise turned her head forward and opened her mouth, before pausing to gather her composure. If Galamon did not lead the attack, and was instead under contract of a human, his actions would make sense. Galamon would never break a contract, no matter the enemy. But the battle was said to be quick and decisive. Someone quickly refuted. Two took on 20 druids, including Tyros. From what was reported, the mage could not have been especially high rank, either. If Galamon was not leading, such a result would be unlikely. Annalise turned her amber eyes to the one who had spoken. Patriarch Draz led our tribe of Vaiden, yet Galamon devised all of the strategies that led to victory in war. Some people were taken aback by the comment which implied Draz owed his patriarchate to Galamon. Many heads turned to wait for the patriarch's response. He had his mouth hidden by a hand. Eventually, he lowered it. He was smiling. True. The strategist need not be the leader, Draz said calmly. My own past has shielded my questioning, though. Getting lost in conjecture does Vaiden no good. The simple fact is this, we are to head to Berenda. Any chance we had to wait for a good time to assault has been lost, and they will prepare for our coming. The patriarch stood and walked to the top of the stairs. For unending centuries, the Vadaimon have endured the frigid winds of the north. He shouted. We were born in the fires of Vade's creation, and over the passage of time, the cold has tempered our rough iron will into a fierce warrior's steel. He paused, stepping about. Now, we must come from our sheaths and unleash ourselves upon the world. It is time for us to embark from the shores and make ourselves known as the tool of Vade's will. The room erupted into cheering. Axes were raised into the air in fervor. The patriarch continued his speech, and it echoed throughout the great keep. Though the words spoke of war and battle, none seemed tense. Instead, nearly all had expressions of anticipation, like the time had finally come to fulfill their life's dream. Chapter 25, The Swordfish Sharpens. A knight pushed open a set of oak double doors that had the symbol of House Montesai in the center. The swordfish split open, and a small office lay beyond. A few faces turned towards the new entry. Argrave walked in, looking around the room. It was an office and a library in one, and a big round table occupied the center of the room. Many documents were splayed out across the table. Argrave recognized them. They were from the druids' camp. Barring Nicoletta and Elias, there were two people present that Argrave did not recognize. This was something that had scarcely happened to him since arriving in Berenda. Most of the civilians in Mateth were untouched by the Vadaimon invasion, but the military and leadership were mostly killed. If these two were here, it meant that they had probably died before the game began. The man at the head of the table was of an average build. He bore a set of gilded armor bearing a blue swordfish at the front, so Argrave recognized him as Duke Enrico of Montesai. Argrave placed him at his early 50s. He had blue hair and the same dark pink eyes Nicoletta had. His hair was wavy and well groomed, and his beard was trimmed to a sharp point. He was still quite handsome by Argrave's estimation, a veritable silver fox. The other was a gruff-looking knight with a scar-lined face. His head was shaved bald. He stepped forward, placing himself between Duke Enrico and Argrave. The Duke scanned Argrave, head tilted to peer at him from behind the knight. "This is your friend, Nicoletta?" "Yes, it is." Nicoletta crossed her arms and nodded. Argrave wanted to comment that her answer had changed since they first spoke, but he kept quiet. The Duke continued. "He's a tall one, taller than the king, even." He tapped the table. "Step aside, Knight Commander Rijah." "Duke." The knight obeyed quickly, taking his place at the table. The doors shut behind Argrave. "My daughter has been relaying what you've told her the past few days," Duke Enrico started. His voice was calm and steady, with a certain business-like quality to it. "Your information was supported by what you brought with you, and my men retrieved some of the bodies in that camp of—" "What was the word?" "Druids," Argrave supplied. "Yes, Druids." The Duke stared at him. "Nicoletta may not question where your information comes from. I, however, am greatly concerned by how you know so much. You knew things occurring in my territory before I did. How did you come to know about this camp of Druids?" Elias turned his head to look at Argrave after the Duke had spoken. Clearly he was interested in the answer too. The Knight Commander walked beside Argrave, coming uncomfortably close. He was a fair bit shorter than Argrave, but probably much heavier. Argrave smiled at him, keeping his feet firm. "Information gathering is one of my strengths," Argrave answered. "I talk to a lot of people. I walk around a lot. I do things, favors, for people. You can learn a lot if you have time and an open mind." Argrave essentially described what quests were in an RPG. Indeed, he had learned most of the game through quests, so it was not a lie. One of the key parts of being convincingly deceptive was learning to deceive oneself. Rijah looked dissatisfied by Argrave's answer. The Duke pressed more. "That is not specific." "Who, or what, gave you the information?" Nicoletta grabbed his arm. "Father, please don't do this." The Duke did not look at Nicoletta to respond. "You are too trusting. Thwarting schemes requires considerable caution, and plenty seek to undermine our dukedom. Nicoletta, you are too paranoid." Nicoletta shot back. "Argrave could have made us go to war with Parbon, but he chose to risk himself. That is one matter. This is another." "Hold on a moment," Argrave interrupted. "If I know you, Duke Enrico, you were already planning on rallying soldiers as soon as Margrave Reinhardt started moving towards Dirica." Duke Enrico stared for a moment. Somehow, he made dark pink eyes seem fierce. He had a stare that could make Charles Manson run for his money. "Who or what or where or why, none of that matters," Argrave continued. "Those documents alone should set you on edge. They document your troops better than you do, I suspect." "I know more than I should, and you don't need to know what it is." "The source of information is always important. It helps reveal the intention behind the conveyance of information." The Duke paused, running a hand across his beard. "But, in this case, you are right. Preparation has never undone anyone." On that note, several people have described that battle you had with the Druids. Most called it a massacre, yet you were only 2. "You are a D-rank spellcaster." "Yes." Argrave shook his head. "Yesterday I was. Today, not anymore." That statement elicited a reaction from Elias and Nicoletta. Elias' eyes widened, but Nicoletta burst out, "You said you were going to rest tonight." "I did sleep," Argrave rebutted. "Besides, I'm a lot better now." "No more shivering." "Either way, me being C-rank doesn't matter, as I haven't had the time to learn any C-rank spells beyond Wargfire. I don't think I will before the Vadimen land, either." "I see." The Duke nodded. "You strategized for the attack on the scouts?" "Yes," Argrave confirmed. "Do you have thoughts on what the Snow Elves will do?" "You're asking my opinion?" "Why not ask the egghead here?" Argrave pointed his thumb at the Knight Commander Rijah. The man's face deepened into a frown, but he did not say anything. He did not appear to talk much. "I have asked his thoughts, and now I am asking yours." "I prefer to strategize myself. A hobby of mine, mock warfare." Argrave nodded. "Well, has Nicoletta told you what I said before?" "You believe we are hopelessly outmatched." "I know you are," Argrave corrected. "You're vastly outnumbered. They have ebonice in large amounts, they're more experienced. They have detailed information about your capabilities, and their warriors are physically larger." "It's a losing battle." "Ebonice?" The Duke repeated. "It's an ice that dispels magic. All but the highest-ranking magic breaks on contact with it. Some spells can keep going for a time, but they lose purpose and generally shatter immediately, especially wards. It comes from their region, so they have a lot of it, naturally. My guard Galamon has some, an axe. I can demonstrate it later, but he's away right now." "Our knights aren't lacking in training," the Knight Commander said, speaking for the first time, but with battle experience. "Many of these Vadimen are old, hundreds of years old, in fact, with as many battles under their belt. Their leader, Patriarch Draz, conquered all the other tribes of the region. Their magic isn't at all lacking compared to ours, either." The Duke leaned over the maps on the table. "Then tell me, what do you suggest be done?" "Their primary disadvantage is that they are at sea." Argrave stepped forward, walking past Ryger and Elias to stand over the map. Their longships will try and land on unfortified locations so that their troops can disembark. Hiding traps in the water would be effective. Pikes hidden underwater along the coast would force them to jump into the water and swim to shore. I needn't explain why that's disadvantageous, I think. My daughter mentioned how you thought they might deploy their mages. The Duke began. Their conversation continued, Argrave discussing what he thought and the Duke refining the ideas. Like this, Argrave integrated seamlessly into the battle planning. The morning passed by swiftly. And if they use earth elemental magic as a siege weapon? The Duke pressed, pointing to a diagram of Mateth's walls. It's not so different from pushing a ladder off the side of the wall, only you need mages to deconstruct the platform. They would have to build it like stairs so as not to make it crumble, and that sort of magic is very costly. The walls are quite tall. What if they use it on the wall itself? The walls of Mateth are enchanted. That can't happen. You do know too much, the Duke said musingly. Argrave laughed, stretching and looking out the windows. Look at that. It's near midday. Galamon must be back by now, surely. Well, if that's the case, I have to be going. Where? The Duke inquired harshly. It seems he didn't want Argrave to leave. Barden, I have things of my own to prepare. What things? The door shot open, and a tired-looking man stumbled into the room. Argrave looked at the man in concern. Duke Enrico, my lord, the man said, huffing. This just arrived. He stepped forward, handing a note to the Duke. Margrave Reinhardt's knights were attacked. House Parban has sent missives to all the nobles in Vaska, seeking support in overthrowing the royal family. Elias stepped forward and took the note before the messenger could deliver it. I told you it was coming, Argrave said. It's tough, always being right like this. Shut up, Elias said coldly, hands shaking as he read the note. Then, without another word, he dropped the paper and ran out of the room. Elias! Nicoletta shouted in vain. The heir to House Parban left quickly. That's precisely why this invasion is so dangerous, Argrave commented, sitting in a chair and leaning back casually. Everyone else will be choosing a side in the battle for Vaska. No time to devote to the Elven Vikings. How can you be so casual? This is terrible, Nicoletta shouted. The Duke was silent at this point. He retrieved the letter and read it as Argrave spread his arms wide, asking incredulously, what? I've been telling you this was coming. It's one thing to say it, it's another for it to. Nicoletta sat down as well, clutching her head. Anyway, I really should be going now. Argrave put his hands on his knees and stood up, especially now that things are like this. Hold a moment. The Duke stopped Argrave, putting a hand in front of him. No, really, I'll leave you be. I left my cat in the oven, and my bread needs to be fed. Argrave insisted, pushing past the Duke's hand. I won't restrain you, if that's what you fear, the Duke assured. There's something you should have. Argrave stopped. Oh, the money from the auction? I can't use that yet. Anyway, there's a place to the south at the city just. Well, never mind. Not important yet. I can get it later. Auction? The Duke questioned. Don't worry about that, Dad, Nicoletta butted in. Argrave, we can talk about that later. The Duke gave a fierce glance to his daughter, and she hid her gaze. We'll discuss this later. But for you it's a simple token. If you show this to any of my knights, they will protect you. A simple precaution. The Duke held out a blue token with a swordfish on it. Oh, the mark of Montesai. Nice. Argrave took it, reminiscing. It was a game item that had more or less the same effect. The Duke frowned when Argrave recognized it, but he did not comment. If indeed this invasion occurs, Montesai will have much to repay you for the steps you've taken. It is worthy of nearly anything. Even that magic ring you've got stashed in the basement? Argrave inquired, recalling an artifact that existed in the game. The Duke frowned intensely. Never mind. We'll talk about that later. For now. Argrave held the token in the air, muttering a thanks, and then left quickly. Nicoletta followed him out. But, Argrave, we still have to talk, Argrave interrupted, holding his hand behind him and waving. We'll talk once this is over. No use for money where I'm going. He stashed the token in his pocket and walked for the exit. Chapter 26, The Holy Fool. Argrave opened the door to the abandoned house. He was greeted by a harsh smell. Galamon stood at the table, a fire heating up a large glass bottle that had been turned black by the flames. Jesus, Argrave said, coughing. I forgot how bad that stuff smells. You get used to it when you live next to it, but you're back, Galamon said. Sleep well? Better than usual. Galamon nodded at Argrave's answer, then picked up the glass bottle. He smothered the flames with a blanket. This was the last potion. 8 bottles of the calming brew, 4 stamina-restoring potions. I fixed the ebb on Ice Arrow. It was bent. I presume your leeching session went well? He strode in, waving in front of his face to dispel the smell. Galamon looked at Argrave coldly. Come on, Argrave urged, tapping Galamon's elbow. Laughing at something is how you learn to live with it. The snow elf set the potion down and picked up a cloth to wipe his hands. It is a curse, an affliction. An illness is no laughing matter. Argrave pursed his lips. You don't have to sleep, you don't age, and the only price is a strange diet and heliophobia. I will not rest with Vade when I die. Instead, I will be lost in the abyss. So, don't die, Argrave said, then laughed. His laughter trailed to a stop as Galamon's pure white eyes stared at him like he was a bug. Well, whatever. If it's so terrible, once we've killed the world-ending ancient calamity, we can cure you. Until then, keep those fangs sharp. Vampirism cannot be cured, Galamon said quickly. Not by you alone. Me? I have my ways. Galamon shook his head. Erlebni method would be costly. BFFT, where'd that come from? Argrave waved his hand dismissively, then looked around for his satchel. Why involve an ancient god? There are plenty of ways. Galamon stared. Supposing that is true. You assume I will not die in your fool's quest. Argrave looked at him, pausing. You won't. Looking at you now. That possibility had never entered your head before I mentioned it. No one's dying. Stop being a doomer. Argrave held his hand up. I'll die centuries before you do. Stop with the morbidity. We've got to pack. You've got to pack. We're heading to Baden. Argrave grabbed the satchel and threw it over his shoulders. Amendment. I am going to Baden. You are going beyond Baden, to a dingy little ruin called, I can't pronounce it, Ethel something. Galamon paused, but eventually moved and grabbed his bag, putting stoppers in the bottles and loading them in. It's the eve of war, and you're sending me away? Imprudent. As much as I'd like you to hold my hand through these stormy tides, these past few days of reviewing my plans mentally have led me to one conclusion. Getting an audience with Patriarch Traz is going to be extremely difficult. I need a little something to turn his head. In the chaos of battle, no one is going to listen to me if I shout that an ancient calamity is waking up and I need to see their leader. Get to the point, Galamon said, waving his hands as though to hurry things up. Argrave paused and stared at him. No, I won't get to the point. I refuse. Anyway, I was thinking of some ancient traditions the Vadaimon have that I might be able to take advantage of. I remember that in case of a snowstorm, the Vadaimon would signal each other, even if they were enemies, for shelter. Galamon raised a brow in surprise but nodded. The Veilstraw sign. Yes, I am surprised you know of it. But it's only accepted if there are extremely pressing circumstances that require cooperation or prevent conflict. Life comes before conflict. Right, Argrave nodded. He grabbed a few of the bottles off the table and put them in his satchel. I'm glad you confirmed, because frankly, I wasn't quite sure I got it right. I also don't know how to make the signal. Simply put, you need to head to the ruins to create the circumstances for their Veilstraw sign. Argrave pronounced each syllable, ensuring he said it properly. Galamon frowned. What exactly is in these ruins? It's a tomb, Argrave said excitedly. He'd finished packing all of the potions and came to stand before Galamon. It holds some ancient trace of elves that, well, I could talk about that place for hours, but I'll skip the details. When their warriors grew old, they cover their bodies in melted metal and trap their souls inside. They'd bury their possessions beside them. Therefore, they'd carry their wealth for all eternity. Galamon brushed his hair back. I am not sure that I like. You'll have to go in there. There's a seal on the door, but it broke recently. Some stupid miners. You'll find them dead just about everywhere. From the entryway, you'll need to head to the end room. You want me to fight against a tomb of guardians? You overestimate my capabilities. They won't fight unless you take something, Argrave assured. Just be sure not to kick anything around. You'll be fine, I swear. Why not send your illusionist friend? The yellow-haired, short woman. Surely she, with proven stealth capabilities, would be better at. These things don't have the normal 5 senses. They sense one's magic. Besides, it's dark in there. You have vampire eyes. Galamon went mute, gaze growing distant. There's a crown at the end of the tomb. It's on top of their dead king's head. You'll have to take it and run. All of them will wake up, but they're pretty slow moving. As long as you're quick, it should be fine. They hit pretty hard, though. Don't get hit, Argrave emphasized, pointing. Might as well leave your weapons out front, barring that axe you've got. Hard to kill them without magic. Anyhow, Galamon moved to the chair and sat down. He turned his head up at Argrave. Ever since you mentioned you were fighting Girektig Kiat, I had considered returning the 3,000 gold that you paid me. You were fighting against the world-ending calamity. It is my duty to help, I thought. He pointed to Argrave. That's changed. I'm sending it to my family in Veiden, like normal. It's the last bit of gold they might receive. Argrave smiled. Listen, I know your capabilities. These guys are slow and clumsy. Being heavy is their only virtue. Once the fighting breaks out, you'll be off to fetch them in short order. It's my duty to hold out until then. We'll parley with the Vadaimon, kill the tomb guardians, and then I'll use this silver tongue of mine to get a meeting with Traz. Galamon shook his head and sighed. Argrave had rarely seen such an expression on the big man's face. He stood, and Argrave looked up to meet his eyes. Your plan makes me question your sanity. You possess the same sort of boldness Traz did, I think. He united all of Veiden. You challenge he who would judge the gods. Both are monumental tasks beyond my ambition. I was proud to serve under Traz. Let us see if things are as you suggest, and I will live long enough to take pride in working under you. Like I said, You'll be fine." Argrave hesitantly reached out and touched his shoulder. "I'm more worried about myself. I have to hold out against a tide of Vadaman while you get the cavalry." The atmosphere became harmonious for a moment. Argrave remembered something. The only dangerous guardians are the archers. Those. "Well, I'm sure you'll be fine." Depression washed back over Galamon's face once again. A humble carriage drove down a poorly made road. It was wooden, and though it looked well crafted, it was unadorned with fanciful things. Its most notable feature was a set of statues atop it. It depicted various human figures in saint-like poses. Each seemed to represent something. The modest carriage was contrasted fiercely by an array of gold-armored knights on horseback. They were royal knights, and they guarded the carriage diligently. As the carriage continued along the road, the carriage driver brought the horses to a slow, seeing something ahead in the road. It looked like a heap of black cloth, but it was large enough that the carriage would not be able to drive over it unimpeded. The royal knights moved ahead, well used to dealing with such a thing by this point. One of the knights dismounted and reached over to the heap of cloth to pick it up and throw it aside, but he paused. His back straightened, and then he kicked the cloth. It rolled over, revealing that that pile was actually a body. The carriage door opened. A very large man dismounted. He wore a set of white robes, and they concealed a set of black plate armor. His black hair was bound into one large braid, dropping behind him to his knees. His eyes were grey and his brows were thick and bushy, giving his gaze a fierce quality. "Prince Ryan," one of the royal knights greeted, bowing from atop a horse. "There is a block ahead in the road. This will be only a moment." Orion said nothing, walking out into the road in long, somewhat dainty strides. His clean white robe dragged along the ground, but he did not seem to care. Ahead, the knight had kneeled over the body on the road, examining it. When he heard footsteps, he turned his head. Seeing Orion, he moved to block him quickly. "My prince, I believe this man is diseased. You should keep your distance." The knight tried to stop Orion with a hand. "The gods protect me from harm, loyal knight." Orion pushed past the knight, coming to stand before the body. He kneeled down and removed his gauntlet. The body's gender was indistinguishable beneath the cloth, even with the face exposed. The flesh was waxy and badly malformed. It was very similar to severe leprosy in some respects. Orion held his hands over the face. "I feel heat." He lowered his hand, nearly touching the skin. "Be careful, my prince. I have never seen anything like this disease." Orion paused, then stood. He grabbed the knight's helmet, lifted it up, and grabbed the man's neck. "I told you the gods protect me. Do you doubt their vows? Do you think they will allow harm to come to their favorite child?" The knight only sputtered. Orion released him, and then stepped forward, hugging the knight as the man coughed and tried to breathe properly. "Forgive me. The wrath of Gale consumed me. You are a loyal knight, and kind besides. I love you. We are all the gods' children on this realm." He squeezed tightly, and a single tear fell from his eye. Orion released his embrace and turned away, leaving the knight gasping for air. One of the other knights watched the scene but stayed deathly still. One could veritably see the uneasiness beneath his armor. Eventually, the knight stepped forward and said, "There's a village ahead that the road passes through. What do you wish to do, my prince?" "I love them all," Orion said, as though in answer. "All of them. They're my people. The gods gave me a crook with which to herd men, the gift of their voice, the power of their presence." The knight elected to stay silent, waiting for Orion to continue. "They've spoken to me these past few days, warning me of an enemy, a worm crawling in the skin, around corners, trajection of deadly touch tarantula spiders. I kept my eyes open. Now I see it. The gods did not tell me of a man seeking to do me harm. They spoke of this fell disease." "Prince?" the knight prompted. "I must help them." Orion walked forward along the road. "This war my brother wrote to me of. It does not matter. The people are the gods' creation, and I must keep them safe." "But, my prince." The knight followed. "How? We have no healers, no food, no water, no medicine." "I will find a way. No matter if I need to sell my clothes, my body, they must be helped. This is my enemy, one of my many great tribulations before I, too, ascend to godhood and meet my friends that whisper in my ear the truths wrested from the clenched hand of the heavens." Orion walked, step after step, down the road. He'd left his gauntlet beside the body of the man who had fallen. The royal knights could only cast uneasy glances at each other before following onwards. Chapter 27, Dread Breath of War. Argrave spurred his horse forward, holding his hand to the satchel on his side to keep the bottles from banging about. He knew the terrain well after years of wandering about in Heroes of Berenda, and Argrave stuck near the coast as he headed for Baden. Galamon rode beside him. It had been a challenge to find a horse that could support the elf's weight and height, but they had managed. The horses belonged to the dukedom, technically, but Nicoletta had secured them for the two of them. "Don't fight the horse," Galamon instructed, yelling loudly so his voice carried as they moved. The snow elf was a much better rider than he. "Don't react to its movements after they've happened. Move in sync with it. It'll reduce the burden on both your and its body." "Yeah, I'll just do that." "Move in sync with the horse. It's easy, bro. Just do it," Argrave muttered into the wind with a mock-jock tone. The horse carried onwards. Argrave watched for landmarks, guiding them to their destination. The suns were high overhead, and the temperature was pleasant. This place didn't seem like one on the eve of war. The two of them rode onwards for a long while. Eventually, Argrave could see the distant buildings of a village. It was not Barden, though. This place was made of cheap wood and straw. Barden was much beyond it. Argrave adjusted his shoulders, telling himself that the journey was probably half done. The sound of a horn filled the air. Argrave thought it was uncannily similar to that of a steamboat. He had wits enough to slow his horse instead of pulling it to a stop instantly, and he looked at where the noise had come from. The horn came again. Argrave could see someone standing atop an outpost at the village with a horn larger than themselves held above their head. There, beyond the crags, Galamon said, pulling up beside Argrave. A longship cuts the waters. Argrave looked out across the sea, squinting his eyes. He saw a moving mass of brown. They flew a red flag with a black wheel in the center. It was too distant to make out details beyond that. Argrave cursed. So much for that conversation with the god-forsaken duke. A waste of time. I could have learned a useful C-rank spell. Instead, I spent it giving advice for an invasion that was happening today. Don't think on it. You will get lost with that mentality, Galamon cautioned. Rely not on the likelihood of the enemy's not coming, but on our own readiness to receive him. Argrave turned to Galamon. They're still at sea. Let's move. Once we get to Barden, you'll have to keep going. Right. They both spurred their horses forward, moving faster than they had before. The horn continued to blow, and the village ahead became a hive of movement. People ran inside their homes, barricading windows and doors. The village militia, bolstered by a few dozen knights, spread out along the front of the village in the coast, urging fishermen to get away. The pair had planned to travel through the village, but Argrave redirected them along the outskirts so as not to interfere with people moving about the road. As they rode by, shouts of unease and urgency entered their ears. My leisure caused this. I should have acted faster. I should have acted smarter. I knew it was coming, and I didn't do it right. Argrave did not have the time to get lost in self-reflection, as the road demanded his attention. It was difficult to suppress the urge to look out at the ocean and see how close the longships had come to the shore. As they traveled along the road, Argrave's whirling mind made the time pass by quicker. Before long, Barden came into sight. It was a quaint village with a larger dock than the one before it. The houses looked firmer than the village before, and it possessed a meager palisade to ward off attackers. The longships had not yet reached it. There's Barden, Argrave shouted, turning his head to look at Galamon. Do you remember the directions I told you? You're asking now? Of course I do, Galamon answered back. Good, good. Argrave muttered, nervousness brewing within. Once we reach the palisade. I know. Galamon nodded. We discussed this already. There is nothing left but to do our duties. Argrave took a deep breath, looking forward silently after hearing Galamon's words. He saw in his periphery some longships moving towards Barden, and hurried his horse even faster than it was already going. The gates had closed at Barden. Galamon broke off from Argrave, and the nervous storm roiling in his chest became a tsunami crashing around. He was all alone. The defense of Barden, and perhaps his life, would rely only on his ability alone. He hadn't repaid his magic debt to Earl Bbook. He could not use the blessing of supersession. Argrave slowed his horse, stopping at the gate. He shouted, I come from Mateth. I need to speak to Knight Riles. He heard some people speaking within loudly, and eventually, the gate opened. A knight stood there. Knight Riles is here, sir. He's with the knights near the docks, helping the people get to safety within their homes. He pointed down to the docks. Thank you, Argrave said, slightly winded. He led the horse, and then promptly dismounted. He left it there without tying it to anything. A horse would be of no use to him now, anyway. Leaving was not an option, not anymore. Argrave walked down to the docks. He spotted the knight he was looking for. The leader of this detachment of knights, Knight Riles. He had a blue plume on his helmet. He was one of the few to survive the invasion on Montesai. In the game, Riles led a guerrilla force against the Vadaimon after they seized the coast. The knights were speaking amongst themselves, while the militia waited a fair distance away, waiting to be told what to do by the knights. Knight Riles, Argrave shouted out, drawing the man's attention. He walked closer until he stood face to face. Knight Riles, I'm glad I made it in time. You know me? The knight asked, his voice echoing from beneath his helmet as he looked up at Argrave. No, not before this. Duke Enrico sent me here. I am Argrave of Blackguard. After bringing up his old pseudonym, Argrave reached in his pocket and retrieved the mark of Montesai he had been given this morning. Barden is likely to become an important battleground. He wished for me to. Argrave swallowed the words, take command. No matter what mark he had, things would not go well if he seized command from a respected commander on the eve of battle. He wished for me to offer guidance on how to deal with the snow elves, and further offer my abilities as a wizard of the Grey Owl. A spellcaster? Your kind are always welcome. But guidance? I'm not sure. Riles trailed off. Argrave interrupted. I was the one to deal with the druids hiding in the forest. I know how these elves fight. I won't undermine your command, but Barden is an important strategic position, and I can help you devise countermeasures to their strategies. Riles lowered his head. Argrave could not see his expression from behind the helmet, but he knew the man was deep in thought. A knight standing nearby interjected, there isn't time for much, Knight Riles. Their strange ships are approaching. Riles looked behind him at the ocean, and then back at Argrave. "Tell me your thoughts. I'll decide whether or not to implement them." Argrave surveyed the surroundings quickly. They can only land on the left side. The cliffs to the right of Barden are too steep, and the docks too narrow for a warship to fit. We should send the skiffs out to sea without anyone on them. Any sort of impediment preventing the elves beaching smoothly will be helpful. But their property isn't important now, Argrave interrupted, walking out into the docks. "Look at the number of elves on those longships. They are likely the same number as we, but each is heavily armored and highly skilled." Riles put his hand on the pommel of his sheathed sword, but eventually nodded. "You're right. It's a good idea. Tell the militia to do that." Riles directed one of the knights. "What else?" "The archers should take their place behind the palisades. The Vadaimon have throwing axes, javelins. Our bowmen need cover. If there is no position they can look over the palisade, stack crates or furniture for them to shoot effectively." Riles nodded. "What of the spearmen?" "They should receive the elves on the shore." "That's ridiculous. You're sending those men to their deaths," Riles protested. "It isn't ridiculous. These men have never seen large-scale battle before. The palisades will break in seconds, and the Vadaimon will lose the disadvantage of being at sea. If you send in your elite knights and they are routed completely, these militiamen will break and run. Besides, the spears will be effective at slowing their movement in the shallow water. If I am just behind them, I can attack with magic while the elves are slowed." Riles shifted on his feet, devising a rebuttal. "You assume my knights will be routed easily. If you think I am tall, I am barely above average amongst the snow elves." Argrave shook his head. "They are giants, one and all. Furthermore, they are no stranger to warfare. Their fighting style is fierce and rapid, though it's uncomfortable to think about. Seeing them battle the militia may prepare your knights better for their attack." Riles grew quiet for a moment, considering Argrave's opinion. He lifted his head towards Argrave. "You said you would stand on the battlefield, not behind the palisade? If the militia are first on the beach, yes, the knights should be behind them." "I will stand with the knights." Argrave turned his gaze to the ocean. The militia were busy pushing out the boats to sea, and before long, the ocean was filled with empty vessels drifting along with the tides. The longships loomed ever closer. Argrave could see someone standing on the front of one of the boats. It was a woman. She had very long white hair and wore a white fur outfit. "What is she doing here?" Argrave said aloud despite himself. "What?" Riles questioned. "Nothing," Argrave dismissed. "Someone I know on the docks, that's all." Internally, Argrave cursed. "That's Annalise. Why is she here?" She specifically never entered the vanguard. Annalise was one of the most prominent Vadaimon characters. After Mateth fell, she became Dra's chief strategist after distinguishing herself in the siege. She had two very powerful traits, genius and empath. She used them both to great effect to devise very good battle plans that read the opponent like a book. That was the law, at least, in-game. She was an extremely powerful mage. Her magic affinity, just like Argrave's, was high. At this early juncture in the game, she was likely a C-rank spellcaster. Riles nodded, seemingly having made up his mind. "If you're confident enough in your idea as to stand out in the front lines, I'm inclined to put more belief in that." "Then we have talked enough. Let's move," Argrave answered quickly. "Right. You all heard our conversation, men and women. Convey the orders to the militia. We have very little time," Riles shouted, rushing to the gate. He drew his sword, and the militia manning the gate worked together to pull the gate open with a string. Argrave followed him out on foot. Argrave opened up his satchel bag and retrieved 2 potions. He drank them both and tossed them to the ground. Rotating his shoulders, he felt the nervousness fade from his body and the aches he'd accumulated from horse riding became a distant memory. After, he pushed the satchel to his back and followed the militia who were just beginning to head onto the beach. "Damn it all." Annalise, Argrave cursed internally. "I don't know if she's a soldier, if she's leading, or if she's merely a mage helping. I don't want to kill her before brokering peace with the Vadaimon. She was always invaluable when fighting Girektik Kiet." "Whatever happens, happens," Argrave said, mostly to himself. He strode out onto the beach. The longships just began to collide with the drifting boats, slowing slightly but pushing onwards. The time had come. Chapter 28, Confronting the Long Sleep. The oars on the longships churned the sea, pushing towards the shore. There were 3 of them. The skiffs, adrift on the tides, were pushed aside, some filling with water and sinking. Other got caught in the oars, and some were beached, but the effect was achieved. The leading longship slowed greatly, faltering just before the shore. The militiamen by the palisades launched a volley of arrows, and the snow elves aboard had to block them with their shields and duck low. Only a few were hit. Argrave had planned to use a fire spell to catch the ship aflame, but Annalise would quickly counter that with magic of her own. He could not see her now. She had likely moved to the back. He stood a little in front of the knights, watching the situation with a calm mind. The militiamen stood before them holding their spears out to the boat ahead like pikemen waiting for a horse's charge. He saw someone fly through the air, leaping like a grasshopper from the back of the boat. He saw a waving mass of white hair and recognized the person as Annalise. She had used a C-rank wind spell to launch herself to the boat further from the shore. He watched her closely. She pointed to the archers behind the palisade and shouted at the oarsmen. She's recognized the archers as the largest threat, Argrave thought to himself. As the closest longship slowly started to push past the tide of fishing boats, the archers had prepared another round of arrows to fire. They were close enough that not many missed, but the Vadaimon blocked them with their large shields very well. After, the elves stood and threw javelins and axes. Their accuracy was terrifying, and the few archers that did not duck received a grievous blow. Ahead, the longship Annalise had landed on veered off from the beach and headed straight towards the docks. She's planning to ram it into the docks so that she can get at the archers quickly. She'd lose the boat, almost certainly, but the archers are defenseless. Argrave considered stepping away to protect them, but the bulk of the troops would still be at the beach, and so he stayed. Riles, though, was not idle. Militiaman, 3 steps forward. Knight Gilbert, take the men beneath you and protect the docks. One knight broke off from the rest, and 5 men followed behind him. The gates opened for them and quickly shut. At the beaches, the first of the Vadaimon jumped from the longship and into the shallow waters. Each bore a long axe and a round shield. The militiamen rushed forward, stabbing at a long range with their spears. Argrave stepped forward. If Annalise was absent, he could go back to the original plan. He held his hand out and conjured his only C-rank spell, Wargfire. He felt the magic within drain significantly, and a great wolf of fire lunged forward, catching one of the Vadaimon aflame and setting the bow of the longship on fire. He had used a large spell so that the fire would not be extinguished easily, though he loathed spending so much of his magic so early. The snow elf that had been caught on fire dropped into the water to extinguish the flames, and the militiaman seized the initiative to stab him as he lay there. Like this, their confidence was bolstered. Another of the Vadaimon waded from the shallows onto the shore, receiving 3 spears on his shield. He swatted them aside and threw his axe right at Argrave. Argrave did not retreat. He stepped forward and cast an E-rank wind spell. It was a common strategy to use wind magic against projectiles in Heroes of Berenda, as wards were costly and restrictive. The axe bounced back, falling into the sand. The leading elf was stopped by the mound of militiamen, blocking with his shield as he pulled a spare axe strapped to his waist. The flames did not spread too quickly, but they consumed the front of the ship, making it impossible to drop right into the shallow water immediately. Most of the Vadaimon were jumping into the deep portion of the water now, swimming towards the shore. Some beached skiffs funneled them into a line, restricting their mobility. Argrave waited until they were bunched closely for maximum efficiency and started casting, writhing lightning, sparingly. The electricity danced between the group, offering the militiamen time to attack in the spasms that followed. Some of them were unable to raise their shields in time to block spears, and they began to fall one after the other. Despite the clear disadvantage, the Vadaimon began to push the militiamen back, blocking their spears and pushing forward. Another volley of arrows came from behind, and the Vadaimon could not block. Many of them fell dead or wounded into the sea, arrows sticking from their backs. Behind the first longship, the second was coming in at a fair distance to the left, giving the first a wide berth and attempting to land far away from where the troops were most concentrated. The third longship sped towards the docks with terrifying speed, well prepared to sacrifice the vessel for an advantage. In front of Argrave, one of the snow elves hooked a spear with an axe, yanking one of the militiamen forward. The elf dispatched the man with chilling efficiency after with a blow to the head. He stepped over the corpse of one of his comrades, advancing forward into a tide of spears. The few Vadaimon still aboard the longship tossed axes, killing many of the spearmen who were not expecting such an attack. The spearmen, shaken after such a turn, nearly broke formation. Riles shouted behind, "Hold the line!" A monstrous noise roared from the docks, and Argrave saw the longship cut into the village of Barden. The Vadaimon aboard rocked, holding the railings tightly, and some few fell into the sea. Screams came from the village, some panicked, others crying out in war. The archers turned to address the snow elves that were landing behind them. "Wizard Argrave," Riles shouted over the din, "I will leave you here with 2 knights. Take command of the spearmen. We must go confront the second landing party." "No, you idiot. We finish this group up quickly, and then move to confront the others." "Understood." Argrave returned despite his thoughts. He reflected another javelin with an E-rank wind spell. He was starting to feel his calm mind waver, and he quickly retrieved another potion from his satchel to suppress his rising nerves. He finished it and dropped it to the sand. The knights marched away, their loud clangs of steel heading towards the longship in the distance. As though seeing a chance, the Vadaimon before them pushed forward, bracing their shields and pushing. Some of the militia's spears bent and snapped. This push against the tide continued, the snow elves forcing back the superior numbers of the militiamen up the beach. Soon, they were near dry sand. One of the militiamen fell, grabbing a fellow by his side for support. The line collapsed in the center, and the Vadaimon seized the initiative. Argrave lunged and cast the D-rank wind wall, hoping to stall the snow elves from advancing further long enough for the line to recover. Though they bounced back, one stepped forward with a glimmering black axe of ebon ice, shattering the wind barrier before it could do much of anything. The snow elf was perhaps 5 feet away, and steadily approached Argrave. Pivoting on his foot, Argrave casted, writhing lightning, at the ground to avoid the airborne ice. The damage was diminished, but the man spasmed, and Argrave stepped forward, pulling the axe from his loose grip. He held his other hand to the man's visor, conjuring the E-rank spell, Wind Knife. Piercing his eyes through the Viking-like Spangenhelm, he pushed the man's dead body backward into the tide of Vadaman. Knights, advance with me. Militiamen, retreat 3 steps and reform the line. 2 armored knights came beside Argrave, protecting him with their shields. Argrave's magic was half spent by his estimation. The tide of Vadaman rushing forth slowed and split as the dead body fell in front of them. The ebon ice axe felt heavy, but Argrave held it at hand. Shield charge. Argrave directed the 2 knights. They rushed forward, slamming into the tide of Vadaman with their shields. Despite the size difference, without much countering momentum, the front few elves fell backwards like dominoes, and their advance was stalled briefly. Seeing them so thoroughly bunched, Argrave cast another, writhing lightning, in the center. The knights stepped forward, stabbing at those who had fallen. Knights, fall behind the spear line, Argrave commanded, stepping backwards. The Vadaman, after gaining their bearings, rushed forward with great speed. Argrave cast another, wind wall, and they collided against it before moving around it. Argrave and the knights slipped past the militia line, waiting behind them. The snow elves rushed towards them, unimpeded by water or slopes any longer. Their armor and clothes were drenched and they ran through sand, so their speed was not at full potential. Still, their formidable size and unified charge made it seem like confronting a charging elephant. The militiamen stepped back even though the enemy was many yards away. How convenient! Argrave shouted and laughed. They're coming to be impaled on their own. His humor was not exceptional, but it had the effect he intended. The militiamen were calmed slightly. Some of the snow elves hung back, throwing axes and javelins through the air. Argrave counted what few came near him with low-ranking wind magic. When their charge was close, Argrave held his hand out and shot another, writhing lightning, at the ground before them. Their unity was shattered as the center stumbled, but many carried forward unimpeded. The great rush of shields clashed with the spearmen, casting many to the ground. Some of the spears found their way past the shields, and some of the elves did genuinely impale themselves. Things became chaotic quickly. Argrave directed the knights beside him to step forward and attack. He dared not use writhing lightning when they were just a heap of bodies as they were. Argrave saw something moving atop the palisade and turned his head. The archers had fallen, it seemed. The Vadaman came atop the palisades, brandishing their weapons. Shortly after, Annalise came to stand, surveying the battlefield. 2 of the snow elves broke off from the rest and pursued Argrave, both wielding ebon ice axes. The knights were separated from him, so Argrave stepped back to gain some distance, holding his ebon ice axe in front. His eyes widened as he recognized one of them, Vorit, the original commander of the occupants in Baden. He was both a mage and a warrior, though only a D-rank mage. Argrave pranced about, keeping his distance from the 2 elves and keeping his eye on Annalise at the palisade. Both his foes had ebon ice, and he was running low on magic. He dared not move recklessly. Vorit and his companion were wary, watching Argrave's hands as though expecting him to cast a spell. Seeing they were so cautious, Argrave stood still to bait an action. In his peripheries, he saw Annalise preparing a spell. He did not turn his head to face it, doing his best to appear ignorant of her actions. A spear of ice formed, and Annalise propelled the aptly named C-rank spell, Ice Spear, towards Argrave. At the last second, he turned his body towards the ice spear, holding his hand out. Trying to break it with the ebon ice would only break his arm. Instead, he did what he had been doing to all the projectiles thrown at him. He redirected it with a D-rank wind spell. It veered away, flying towards Vorit and his companion. Both leapt away, but the spear stabbed the one Argrave did not know in the leg, pinning him to the ground. Argrave seized the initiative, striding past the fallen snow elf and towards Vorit. The former commander was calm. He raised the ebon ice axe in the air to swing down at Argrave, but in his other hand behind the shield, a spell matrix formed. A wave of fire erupted, but Argrave expected this. He slashed at it with the ebon ice axe, dispelling the magic and dropping the axe to free his hand. His plan disrupted, Vorit swung his axe down at Argrave's shoulder. Argrave held one hand up and cast Wind Knife towards the man's wrist. Blood spurted and the axe fell from his hands, but it still retained its momentum, cutting Argrave's back as it fell. Argrave staggered but kept his bearings enough to use his other hand to cast Wind Knife on Vorit's neck to finish him. The 2 collapsed next to each other, one dead. Argrave sat up, pushing Vorit's corpse away. He reached for his back to close the wound with healing magic but realized it would be the last of his magic. He might need what little remained to hold back Annalise. Though he turned to look, the elven spellcaster was gone from the palisade. He stood, turning his sights towards the militiamen. There, he witnessed a knight finish off the last of the snow elves. 2 spearmen and 1 knight were all that remained. Argrave swallowed his pain, drinking another potion and advancing forward. He grabbed the ebon ice axe that had cut his back. Everyone, we follow Ryle's knights, rejoin with them. Argrave shouted. "But Barden," the knight began. "You expect us to throw ourselves against the palisade with only 4? Regroup. Get away from their throwing range. They are already behind the walls." Argrave would not dare say it aloud, but he was glad they were behind the walls. It would give them more time for Galamon to finish his task, and some little time to recover his magic. The real question lies in if Ryle's group defeated the second ship. If they fell. Argrave shook his head. Ryle's had lived through the assault on Barden before. Even if he lost the village, he must live through it again. Things would be different in this reality. Chapter 29, Walkthrough. Galamon percent. Galamon grabbed the large mass of stone with both of his hands, using his legs to lift it from below. It shifted upwards easier than he thought it would, and he thrust it into the mine shaft behind him. A few fragments of rock fell when the rock was removed, but there was an entryway large enough for him to enter. He had taken off all his weapons except for his ebony axe, completely adhering to Argrave's directions. He crouched low, walking awkwardly forward. He did not need to do so for long. The small passage opened up into a vast room. Galamon stood. He could see everything clearly, and he acknowledged that Argrave had been right to send him. Even with a torch or magic lamp, this place would be difficult to navigate. Galamon could not sense any blood nor sense any movements. Nothing in this place was alive. The room was very open, barring the pillars holding the mountain above up. The central walkway was a neatly polished grey stone and had many branching paths. Beside the walkways, lined up in perfect rows, were rectangular stairways that descended to an altar. Each of these altars, of which there must have been 100, were filled with various objects, weapons, gold, gems, and other such earthly treasures. Nothing was alive, to be sure, but the creatures that Argrave had described filled the place. The tomb guardians sat behind the altars, each in an identical cross-legged pose. They held a weapon across their laps, heads drooping over them as though bowing or sleeping. Their bodies were wholly metal and decidedly anthropomorphic, but they lacked any distinguishing features beyond that. Briefly bewildered, Galamon took out his flask and held it to his lips. He drained the entire thing, and then put it back in its place. He set off into a steady, certain walk, running Argrave's directions through his head. He was careful to watch his steps so that he did not kick anything. A rock might hit one of the altars if kicked, and the situation could quickly get out of hand. Above all, Galamon could not waste time dealing with one of the awakened guardians. The path wound confusingly. Try as he might to remember where he came from, most of the place looked the same, and that only deepened his reliance on Argrave's directions. They included an escape route and everything. If the man had been lying to him, Galamon would be in dire straits. He had come to trust Argrave, though he was at times annoying. Before long, Galamon stood at a set of stairs that led upwards. Pillars stretched for dozens of feet above, holding the great mass of ceiling at bay. Galamon took the stairs 2 steps at a time, and he arrived at a great open portion of room. A royal red carpet that had degraded over the passage of years led to a single massive altar. There was a king's ransom in gold, jewels, and magic artifacts. Behind it was a metal guardian larger than most of what Galamon had seen. He gave the glistening pile of wealth a large berth, walking until he stood in front of the tomb guardian. Argrave had said this man was a dead king. True to his word, a crown hung from the brow. Galamon took a deep breath, running through Argrave's directions one last time. They seemed ridiculous, like a child's game, but Argrave had assured that this strategy worked 200% of the time, whatever that meant. Galamon identified every aspect of the plan, scouted out everything Argrave had mentioned, and took mental note of the closest tomb guardians that had bows, and then he reached both of his hands out, hovering just beside the crown. He moved his hands quickly, touching his fingers to the circlet and yanking it off. The crown's a pretty good artifact. Bolsters your your physical abilities considerably. Leave your helmet outside, and just toss that baby on. Argrave's voice rang through Galamon's head. He put the crown on and leapt back. Galamon leapt much further than he intended and crashed into the pile of gold. The physical enhancements were considerable indeed. The tomb guardian raised his head, standing and lifting the gargantuan sword off its lap. He heard metal clanking behind him, as though 1,000 blacksmiths came to life. Run behind the boss, and head for the left corner of the room. The pillars there are pretty close together, and the big guy won't be able to fit. Galamon sprinted forward and jumped off the altar, easily dodging a slow swing from the tomb's king. He headed for the set of pillars, and then squeezed into them. Once you're there, the king will probably come and try to reach you, banging his sword against the pillars. They're quite strong. They've been holding up a mountain for 1,000 years. After all you need to do is wait. Eventually some of the little guys'll come near. Hiding behind one of the pillars as instructed, Galamon watched as the king slammed the great sword against the pillars. He watched for cracks, fearing they were not as sturdy as Argrave estimated, but there was not a one. He poked his head out, watching for the progress of the tomb guardians. A purple projectile soared through the air, and Galamon brought his head back in, impaling sharply. The projectile impaled into the wall, and Galamon recognized that it took the shape of an arrow. It sunk in very deep, nearly a foot, and then fragmented into purple shards before dissipating entirely. Galamon took another deep breath to calm himself. He waited as the big king slammed his sword against the pillars in unintelligent attempts to get at him. One of the guardians drew near enough to swing at Galamon, He dodged, stepping back until his back was against the wall. Once the tomb's guardians get close enough, you'll want to go to the opposite corner, keeping within the pillars. Just keep hugging the wall, and head for the stairs. It should be a tight pinch. You want them bunched up like that. If it's too tight, just jump. The crown should let you, even with that heavy armor. Galamon sprinted for the opposite corner. Behind him, the archers shot the wall, leaving foot-deep stabs. Galamon drew his ebb on ice, just in case. According to Argrave, what they conjured was pure magic, and so unlike some elemental magics, it would dissipate immediately when touching ebb on ice. Practically flying down the stairs, Galamon kept close to the wall and took a sharp left when he came to the bottom. He kept behind the pillars as instructed. One projectile came close, but he swatted it aside with the axe, surprised by his own speed. Just keep hugging the wall. Eventually, you'll go off into another room, but it has 2 entrances back to the main hall. If you stay in the leftmost corner, you'll give the tomb guardians enough time to shamble away from the mineshaft's entry point. In other words, hide behind the pillars again, waiting for them to group together. A crowd of the tomb guardians blocked the wall ahead, but Galamon could see the room Argrave described just beyond it. He hastened his run, and then jumped as hard as he could, soaring above them. After clearing them considerably, he landed, his legs jolting from the impact. He started running again, and he did not stop until he reached the spot that Argrave had designated. This second room is a long hallway. In essence, it breaks off from the main room and has 2 entryways. The one you'll enter from, and the one that connects back near the entrance. It was constructed to accommodate more bodies once the main room was filled, but their civilization died before they had the chance to use it. As such, empty. Hurry up and wait, Galamon muttered to himself, keeping his eye on what was ahead. The great mass of tomb guardians slowly entered into the room, shambling towards his position. They moved about as fast as he walked, but they were devilishly strong and their bowmen caused problems. The king stood in the back, twice as large as the rest but unable to proceed past the mob that had formed ahead of him. You should probably wait until the king enters the room fully. That's usually the proper cue for when to skedaddle. Galamon watched and waited. The bulk of the archers were also behind the mob, meaning that they could not fire at him. He waited until a few seconds after the king had crossed the threshold, and then bolted. Innumerable projectiles flew at Galamon, too many to work out a path to dodge and dispel with ebb on ice. He considered how to dodge them, but then he simply jumped. He cleared all of them handily, and one of the altars shattered into dust and pebbles when the arrows struck behind him. After this, Galamon ran unimpeded for the opposite side of the hallway. The archers did fire more at him, but their attacks were too far away to have any considerable accuracy. He found the exit to the room, walking back into the main hall. He saw the light shimmering in from the mineshaft and rushed towards it. One of the guardians bearing a sword lunged at Galamon as he ran. He tried to parry the blow, but it stabbed him in the shoulder and he dropped the axe. He pulled his arm free, deliberating between the axe and the exit. Ultimately, he decided to move towards the exit. The wound had already stopped bleeding, and he felt his vampiric blood stir as the injury closed itself. He reached for his second flask, draining it of blood and sating himself before his instincts could consume him. He had none left after this, but the worst was over. I'll be sure to make that Binpole reimburse me for the tax, Galamon thought to himself, dodging a purple arrow that flew past. He came to the entrance, ducking into a graceful slide that delivered him right into the mineshaft. There, he grabbed his helmet and his weapons, stringing them to his person as quick as his fingers could manage. He moved as fast as the close confines of the mineshaft would allow, moving towards where he sensed air was coming from. It was not long before he was outside. He took a deep breath and exhaled. Once you're out, just set off riding. They've got magical tracking on the crown, you see. The big guy will get stuck at the entrance, seething, while our favorite frozen freaks will chase you towards Barden. There, I'll either be dead, dying, or starting to form an ego after holding back a diamond raiding party. I lived. That felt wrong, somehow. Sheep, Galamon mused. He walked to the horse, untying its reins from the rock he'd attached it to. He leapt on, spurring the horse forward. He took off the crown and threw his helmet on to hide his elven ears. He looked behind, scanning the cave's entrance. It took some time, but the metal things started to emerge from the mine. Let's see if I find a corpse or a hero. Chapter 30. First Contact. Annalise watched the 4 survivors run to rejoin the detached group of better-armed men. That the defending force had a mage was an unexpected variable, but she adapted to it as best she could. The man was formidable. He killed the former commander and led to the deaths of dozens of others. Those thoughts gave her a pit in her stomach. Patriarch Idris had given Annalise command to evaluate her after she spoke up at the gathering, and her first task was not a clean victory. We've won, Commander Annalise, one of the snow elves said formally. Have we? She asked, watching them walk away from the makeshift platform beside the palisades. The second ship's fate is not decided, but chasing after them now would probably be fruitless. Losing 2 ships worth of diamond for this village. Our task was to secure a landing for further troops. We have succeeded in that. All that remains is holding this position. Annalise turned to look at his face, gauging his emotion. His breathing was fast, but he did not turn away from her gaze. After further examination without seeing any signs of anger, She judged he was not discontent with the battle. Had you not made the call to kill the archers immediately, all would have died on the shores, the elf continued, oblivious to her scrutiny. Annalise turned away, stepping off the platform. We may not have enough men to hold this place. The humans are barricaded in their homes now, but should things change, if they were resigned to die, they would have joined their soldiers in defense of their village. Let them cower in their homes. The elf jumped down after her and kicked one of the houses. A panicked yelp came out from within. Kick a hornet's nest, tempt many hornets' wrath. She scolded, looking at the man coldly. We are to preside over these people as subjects, not enslave them. Behave, or you will be punished. The elf paused, and Annalise moved past him. Her gaze moved from place to place, surveying the docks and the damage that had been done with the ship. The longship was floating still, but the front half was suspended above the water, balanced precariously on broken wood. If it were to enter the water, Annalise was sure it would sink. The other ship was aflame, and could not be salvaged. She heard a loud split and presumed one section of the docks had broken. Wood splinters striking her cheek made her turn her head. One of the palisades had been knocked over, badly deformed but barely standing. She saw a flash of dissipating purple, but nothing after that. A few shouts made her walk to the palisade. She peered beyond the broken one. She saw a whir of movement, and only after did she process that a horseman had just rode by. She grabbed one of the stakes and pulled herself up, peeking over the side. To the right, a horseman galloped off towards the humans. Behind, there was a mass of shining metal. Annalise's heart jumped into her stomach. She assumed they were knights for a moment, the sunlight reflecting off their polished steel as a great crowd of men moved to reclaim the village. But their movements were jerky, and further scrutiny showed that they lacked joints. They looked like metal men. Another purple projectile shot forward, and Annalise dropped down. It hit the dirt, creating a great cloud of dust from the sheer force. She briefly saw an arrow before it dissipated into nothingness. The human trap? She questioned. Most of the Vadaimon ran to the palisades, examining what exactly was firing at them. Annalise sprinted over to the other side, pulling open the gate and looking out at the crowd of humans. The horseman rode across the plains, slowing the horse before dismounting it beside the distant party. Not many were left living, 10, by her count, the mage, the rider, 6 knights, and 2 spearmen. The mage walked ahead of the rest of them. Some of the purple arrows fired, but he dispelled them by casually blocking with the ebony axe. The 2 were enemies. Annalise scrutinized further. She watched the human mage step closer, appearing casual. He raised his arms above him, fists clenched, until they formed the V. Then, he closed the V repeatedly, touching his knuckles together. Even this far away, Annalise could distinguish a vague hint of triumph on his face, a Veilstrong sign. He brought this horde here to force collaboration. Annalise's mind worked quickly, but those things approaching seemed mindless and hostile. Would the man rather lose the village than the battle? Nevertheless, she returned the sign. If the man had caused this horde, it stood to reason he would be the key to ending it. Wizard Argrave, what are you doing? Riles yelled. What is that horde? This is a sign for parley, Argrave explained, keeping his head facing forward. Those things are monsters. The Vadaimon have a tradition of collaborating in the face of danger, snowstorms, big beasties, the like. Collaborating? Riles demanded, stepping forward. You brought those things here? Explain yourself. I did. Well, my friend did, actually, but I ordered him to. Argrave responded. Galamon stepped behind Argrave, placing himself between Riles and Argrave. What were you thinking? Riles walked forward, but Galamon held him back. I was thinking I could find a way to get them to vacate Baden, and perhaps all of Berenda, Argrave said back. So we should set aside arms, work with those we were killing moments ago? Riles insisted. You're a madman. I showed you the mark of Montesai. I work for the Duke directly. I am one of his principal agents. This is part of the Duke's plan. Argrave turned round, pushing past Galamon. He handed his ebony axe to Galamon and grabbed Riles' shoulders. If I do nothing, not just Maeteth, but all of House Montesai will fall. This has to be done. I am going to stop this invasion in its tracks. He could hear the knights breathing from beneath the helmet, rapid and angered. Eventually, the man pulled free from Argrave's grip and returned to his knights. I refuse to come with you. If you are confident going, then go. Then will you help against the metal men? Yes, Riles spoke, angry. For the sake of the Duke's plan, if nothing else. But I don't like this. Argrave nodded. He tapped Galamon's shoulder. Let's go. The two started walking across the plains. Argrave saw Annalise waiting. He was quite pleased they did not fight, as she was a helpful person in killing Girektik Kiat. The battle was not over, though. With their parley coming so close, Argrave realized the biggest issue, presently, was dispatching the vast horde of tomb guardians come to reclaim the crown. Depending on how this talk goes, this could be very hard or quite easy. You lived, Galamon commented. How's the ego? Argrave could not muster a laugh. He felt like vomiting, truthfully. The experience had been intense. I could say the same for you. Jesus, that was hard fought. The idiot backed the ditched just because we were holding our own. We very nearly lost. I lost my axe. Galamon held up the one Argrave had handed him. I was going to make you pay for a new one. But you gave me this. Lucky me. Argrave looked ahead, where Annalise half jogged towards them. He saw her fully for the first time. Her amber eyes were bright, but her incredibly long white hair was stained with dirt and some blood. Argrave turned back to Galamon, tapping his breastplate with his knuckle. By the way, keep the crown hidden. We don't want them to know they're chasing you. Galamon nodded. If I throw it back to them, will they leave? Not really. They're hostile to all life at this point. Unfortunate. Galamon stopped, holding Argrave back as Annalise drew nearer. Hello, Annalise, Argrave shouted. That brought her to a stop. At a fair distance, Annalise spoke back. How do you know my name? The same way I know the Veilstraw sign. Do you think the Vadaman are the only one capable of spying on the enemy? Argrave said. But we're wasting time talking. I'm Argrave. This is Galamon. You may know him. Her face was passive. She was very good at keeping her expressions in check, Argrave knew. Even her amber eyes stayed still. Then the druids. She paused. This horde, you brought it? Can it be stopped? Argrave smiled. Yes, it can. Unfortunately, Miss Annalise hunted the archers, throwing a massive wrench in my strategy and leading to most of the men dying. Consequently, I will need your full cooperation for this to be as easy as I hoped. I cannot apologize. It was my duty. She shook her head. Your duty is ridiculous. Then, your duty is the reason why this world's cycle might come to an end, Argrave said, hamming his speech up. While you wage this senseless war, he who would judge the gods stirs. That is why I created this situation. You're feigning anger, Annalise returned. Argrave felt exposed and uncomfortable, his acting being so blatantly called out. He who would judge the gods. Is this true? Annalise looked to Galamon. Galamon nodded. He is the mortal agent of Erlebne, the hand reaching from the abyss. He seeks to stop Galactic Kiat. During my employment, he has been struggling towards that end. Argrave looked to Galamon, surprised that the elf could pull out such a quality story from thin air. Wow, I should have thought of that sooner. I was too busy trying to avoid that name. I should have just embraced it. He saw the elf looked very serious. Or maybe this isn't a con. Come to think of it. Annalise showed genuine surprise for the first time, and spoke before Argrave's thoughts could wander. You speak truly? This is unimaginable. Erlebne is one of those gods on trial. I am his defense. Argrave took a step forward. As such, in return for our aid, I would expect to be taken to Patriarch Draz. This invasion needs to cease. The living races of the world need to preserve their strength for the ancient calamity. That is my task, my duty. Argrave held his hand to his chest where the bronze hand mirror lay in his pocket. Annalise looked back to the horde of metal men behind. Then, she turned back. I have no choice in the matter, given what you've brought, but I would still agree. If Galamon the Great would speak for you, I believe you are not being dishonest. The ancient calamity takes precedence over all, such as Vade teaches. Annalise spent a long time thinking, staring at the dirt with a distant stare in her eyes. Argrave waited patiently. Eventually, she nodded. We will allow your men in. I will explain to mine what is happening. We will make a contract ironing out the details. Just like that? Argrave asked incredulously. Well, I won't complain. I believe you are not lying. Someone ordinary could not bring these things here. As I said, I have no choice, she emphasized. More is lost from indecision. Then I will speak to my own. Argrave nodded. He turned on his heel and walked back towards the party, back still stinging with pain. Hey, listen, Galamon. Galamon looked at Argrave as they walked. I know I just asked you to lure them over and all, and that was a very difficult task that I'm immeasurably thankful you did. Argrave paused. But? Galamon prodded, hefting the ebon ice axe in his hand. Well, there's maybe 30 of us total including the Vadaman. You've got this nifty little crown on you that attracts their attention. You're probably the best warrior here. I replaced your ebon ice axe. So? Galamon ran his finger across the axe's edge. If you could distract them while we prepare. For a little, Argrave proceeded, making hand gestures. A long while, maybe. We could probably win. If not, we'll all be quite dead. Galamon shook his head as they walked. I'm starting to feel less pity for that cut on your back. Argrave looked to Galamon. I hope that means yes, I will do it. Galamon nodded. Argrave let out a sigh of relief. He turned his head to look at Galamon. But how can you tell I was injured? Beyond the split clothing? I can smell the blood. It makes me forget I asked. Argrave interrupted. Let's just get going. He hastened his steps. Galamon reached up to his arm, massaging where he'd been stabbed, before moving to catch up with Argrave. If you like this audiobook, subscribe the channel for more videos like this. And join my Patreon if you want to support me, where you can find the complete collection Jackal Among Snakes audiobooks. Hurry up, what are you waiting for? Leave some comment and let me know if you guys like this story, or you have a web novel you like and want to hear its audiobook. I will be happy to create them for you. Please like, share, and leave a comment on the video.